Welcome everyone to the Aspen City Council work session of November 17th. We're starting to get to the close of the year. And so today's first agenda item is going to be a discussion with the Kids First Early Childhood Center for Community Needs, the assessment report and presentation. So just introduce yourselves for the public and we'll take it from there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Richards, members of council. I'm Megan Monahan, co-manager of Kids First with Nancy Nichols. And we are joined this evening by Sarah Hughes, who's at my right, and then her partner, Beth Melton, is joining us over Zoom. And they are the consultants who helped us conduct this community child care needs assessment.
And I see a number of Kids First board members in the room, so really appreciate the participation.
You got that right. We do too. And a director or two, which is great. So we're here with our consultants that we contracted with to present to you the report for the Early Childhood Needs Assessment. And we're really excited to have a conversation with you about it. And in the report and also in the assessment, obviously, Burlingame Early Childhood Education Center is a topic. It won't be the central topic this evening. We're really going to focus on the report and the overall results of the report because we're going to come back to you on January 26th to have a dedicated work session really focusing on Burlingame. So as you have questions that come up about that, take notes. We will have a Q&A at the end, and we can take down all of the questions, and when we come back to you in January, we'll do our best to answer all of those questions. So I'm going to let Sarah Hughes introduce herself and her partner, Beth. And Sarah, thanks for driving down from Denver, or up from Denver, and bringing all the snow.
Yes, my pleasure. You're welcome, everyone, for the snowfall. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm really excited to be here to share the findings of the needs assessment that my colleague and I have been working very closely with Megan and Nancy on over the past several months. And I just want to start by giving them a huge thank you. They were so wonderful to work with and really helped facilitate the connections that we need as consultants to come into a community and do good work. So immense thanks to both of you, and then also would be remiss if I didn't thank the many parents and childcare providers and community members that also spent their time with us over the last few months to share a little bit about their childcare experiences and challenges and successes. I am also a mom to a childcare aged kid, and I know that time is in very short supply for parents with young kids, so very much appreciate all of the time that folks spent with us over the last few months. We will get started with some quick introductions. My name is Sarah Hughes, and I'm one half of the consulting team on this project. And my work largely focuses on collecting and analyzing data for clients who are working in the childcare and public health fields. I've been doing this work here in Colorado for the last 15 years and have had the chance to work with a lot of really wonderful communities around the state who are all wrestling with questions around, do we have enough childcare? If not, what should we do about it? And as Megan mentioned, I'm based in Denver, where it's been 75 degrees every day this month. So even though it's very gloomy outside, I'm happy to be here and get a taste of what feels like normal Colorado fall weather. So thank you for that. And I'll pause for just a moment and let my colleague Beth introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to participate remotely today. I am Beth Melton. My consulting firm is Melton Strategic Solutions. My consulting firm focuses on childcare policy, primarily in Colorado. Do a lot of work with local governments, with the state legislature, and with nonprofits in the state that are working to improve childcare access, and especially do a lot of work around supply building and facility development.
Great, thank you, Beth, and you'll hear a little bit more from Beth in the second half of today's presentation. But we'll start our presentation today by sharing some of the big picture goals and questions that we were trying to answer with this needs assessment. So first and foremost, Kids First and the City of Aspen wanted to understand the current and future childcare needs here in Pitkin County. So where the childcare ecosystem is serving families really well, and then other places where there may be some unmet needs. And a second goal, and certainly related to the first goal, was focused on evaluating the need for a new childcare center at Burlingame Ranch. Most of you are probably already familiar with that proposed project. I know there's been a lot of community conversations about it over the past several years, but in case a recap would be helpful for anyone, Burlingame Ranch has been envisioned as a new childcare center in the Burlingame Ranch neighborhood that would serve upwards of 90 children between the ages of infants up through preschool aged. And prior to making what would be a very significant investment in a new facility, the city hoped to understand the true need for childcare here, which we will shed some light on today. So in seeking to answer these questions, we use several methods of gathering data and feedback and information from people. We kicked off the project by conducting interviews with community partners, so nonprofits working in the region, school district folks, local government folks, as well as licensed childcare providers and large employers. And these conversations are always incredibly helpful at kind of giving us the lay of the land, because every community in Colorado is very unique. The childcare landscape varies a lot from place to place, and so these conversations really help ground us in what's going on here in Aspen and in Pitkin County. And we use what we hear from those conversations to inform what we ask about in some of our later data collection efforts. We also conducted a survey of families with young children between April and June of this year. Some people here may have taken that survey if you have a young child. But this survey was available in English and in Spanish and asked about topics like current childcare arrangements, satisfaction with their care, families' preferred locations and types of care, among other things. And then in addition to the quantitative data that we gathered through the survey, we also conducted some focus groups with families who either live or work in Pitkin County between May and June. These were also conducted in in English and in Spanish. And these were really great opportunities for us to hear from families in greater depth and really have some good nuanced conversations about what their challenges and experiences have been and get richer information than you're able to get from an online survey. And then finally, we also collected a lot of demographic data. So we looked at things like the current child population, as well as what's forecasted to happen with the child population in the future, as well as employment patterns and commuting patterns from the region. And all of this helped inform our analysis of childcare need now and then also in the years ahead. And when estimating childcare need, it's really important to first understand employment circumstances among parents with young children, because parental employment is naturally going to be a big driver of demand for childcare in a community. And across the Roaring Fork Valley, and particularly here in Pitkin County, a high percentage of young kids live in families where all available parents are working. So nearly 9 out of 10 here in Pitkin County, which is much higher than what we see at the statewide level. So these data suggest that the majority of families with young kids in this region are going to need some type of childcare for their young children while they work. And indeed, this was the case when we surveyed families across the Roaring Fork Valley. Across the region, more than 8 in 10 survey respondents indicated that someone other than their child's parent was watching them at some point during a typical week. And when we asked families about what type of care they currently use, licensed child care centers were the most common source of child care across the region. But many families also rely on what's often referred to as informal care. And informal care is kind of a catch-all term for a nanny share, an au pair, a grandparent, a neighbor, any child care provider that's kind of operating outside of the licensed child care system. So that's certainly a very important source of care for a lot of people. And then we also heard from many folks who are piecing together care from multiple sources to be able to meet their needs. So they might have a child in a child care center for 3 days a week, and then they have a parent home with them for one and a grandparent home with them for another. So a lot of families are kind of having to get creative with how they meet those needs for child care. One really bright spot in the data that we found is that families are generally very satisfied with the quality of care that they're receiving, and that was particularly true for those who have care with a Pitkin County child care provider. So parents whose child was cared for here in Pitkin County were much more likely to say that they were very satisfied with the quality of their care than folks who had children in care in other places throughout the Roaring Fork Valley. So it's encouraging that when families are able to find the care that they need, that they feel very positively about the care that they're getting. On the flip side, some pain points that emerged from the survey and the focus groups included the cost of care. Now, the City of Aspen and Kids First does have a very generous financial aid policy that probably most places around Colorado and the country are very envious of, but still cost of care can be very challenging for families. Another struggle that we heard a lot about was the availability of care for the youngest kids, so babies and toddlers under the age of 2.5. We saw in the survey data and heard from families that it can be a real struggle to find an available slot for children when they're very young, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. And then finally, we heard about struggles to find a slot that meets families' needs in terms of location and operating hours. And this was particularly true for folks who are commuting a long way for childcare. You can imagine if your childcare provider closes at 5, but your job is an hour away, that could be really logistically challenging for your family's work schedule and work-life balance. And so that was certainly a challenge for a lot of folks who were coming from places outside of Pitkin County for care. So moving to what was kind of the core question of this needs assessment, is there enough care for all families who need it? We looked at both child care supply here in Pitkin County and then also child care demand. Supply is fairly straightforward. We're able to look at licensing data from the Colorado Department of Early Childhood. They collect and publish data on licensed capacity or licensed slots in child care providers across the state. But understanding childcare demand is a little bit more complex. It's not really a situation where you can look at the number of childcare slots, look at the population of children in the county, and then look at the difference, because there's a lot that goes into childcare decisions for families. So unlike estimating housing need, for example, where you can reasonably assume that every family is going to need some sort of housing, the sheer number of decision points that families are facing when they're making childcare choices makes demand a little bit trickier to predict. So not every family will need or want childcare, so you kind of have to get a handle on how many of them do. And then if they do need childcare, there are decision points around what type of provider do they need? Do they need part-time care or full-time care? Is there care available that's affordable to them? So there are all these other factors that you need to account for when looking at the demand for childcare in a community. And then it becomes even more complicated in a place like Pitkin County, where you are really an employment center for the region and have people commuting in from Garfield or Western Eagle counties, and those folks may want to have their kids cared for in Pitkin County as well. And so we tried to account for as many of those factors as we could by looking at things like not only the child population, but also commuting patterns from other communities, and then parent preferences for where they'd like their care to be and what type of care they would like to use. Quick aside, regarding waitlist data. So a lot of the time when people are looking to estimate childcare demand, the first place they look is childcare provider waitlist, which makes sense. In most places, those are really readily accessible, and they certainly can be one data point for considering what demand might look like in a community. But it's not the most reliable way to estimate demand because A few reasons. Number one, families often remain on wait lists even after they might have found care in another setting because maybe they're waiting for a preferred provider. So they're leaving their name on that list even though they're not technically a family that is still in need of any care. And then we also heard from families and providers that families are often on several different wait lists simultaneously. And so that's the reason why, even though wait list data are kind of a common source for demand data, that was not included in the analysis and the estimates that we used and that we'll present on today. So we'll start with the easier side, which is childcare supply. So as of July 2025, when we were putting the report together, Pitkin County's licensed childcare providers had enough license slots to serve 508 children. The true number of kids who could be served is probably actually below that number. Providers often have staffing shortages that might limit the number of kids that they can serve, or there are other factors at play there. But 508 would be the maximum number of kids who could have a slot in a licensed childcare setting in Pitkin County. On the other side, the demand side, again, we looked at a few different factors. We looked at child population by age group because availability of care can look very different if you're looking at infants versus preschoolers. We also looked at commuting pattern data from the Census Bureau to try to get a handle on how many parents might be commuting from outside of Pitkin County to work here. And then we used family survey data to try to understand, of those parents that are coming to Pitkin County for work, how many of them actually want to use a Pitkin County child care provider. And we used all of these data sources to understand what true demand might look like here in Pitkin. And I will spare you all of the nitty-gritty on those calculations. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and nobody wants to look at math problems. But when we put all of these pieces together, Pitkin County likely has a shortage of licensed childcare for some age groups, namely infants and toddlers under age 2.5. So as you can see here in the graph, if you're looking just at Pitkin County kids, there are about 1.8 infants per licensed childcare slot, 1.6 toddlers per licensed childcare slot, but then preschool care appears sufficient to meet demand. There's 1 preschool slot for every preschool age child in Pitkin County. And when you add in potential commuters from Garfield and Eagle County providers, you see these numbers get larger. Still a shortage for infants and toddlers, but preschool care again comes pretty close to meeting the potential demand there. And I would say these quantitative numbers align really closely with what we heard from families during focus groups, where we heard a lot of struggles from people who spent time on wait lists trying to get care for their infants or toddlers, but once their child was 2.5, which is typically the age where they're old enough to go into a preschool classroom, they felt like they had many more options available for them to choose from. So the quantitative and the qualitative data here are really telling us similar things.
Can I ask a question? I don't know.
Sure.
I should save it to the end or now. If you'll pull back to that last slide. I'm just kind of wondering how the growth numbers, 15% Garfield County workers and 11% of Eagle County workers, is that a percentage of their whole populations of 15% of Garfield County workers are working up here?
Percentage of workers, yes. So not the full population. It wouldn't include people that aren't in the labor force.
It wouldn't include seniors or children, but you're talking about of the working population, 15%.
Correct.
Okay, and when you talk about 11% Eagle County, that's within this Roaring Fork Valley?
That is for Eagle County as a whole, because unfortunately there's not a way to get that specific data point for that western Eagle County region specifically.
Okay, yeah, and this doesn't necessarily have to be squared up, but I just know that the county has been working on their 2050 plan and studying growth patterns and things like this, and they had come up with a report that 60% of all the workers in Pitkin County come from outside the county, and 10% of that as far away as 50 miles a day. And so I'm just kind of wondering if those two are kind of merging with what you found.
I'd have to look specifically at their data point, but it sounds like they're kind of each looking at a separate the same people that are commuting, but
Yeah.
looking at things from two different sides. One is looking at the percentage of the Pitkin County workforce that's coming from outside, and then the other one is looking at the percentage of Garfield and Eagle County employed people that are coming in. And
Okay.
so the number itself might be similar, but it's kind of looking at two different denominators, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Thank you for letting me interrupt. I wanted to kind of make sure we were all square on those numbers.
Yes, and thank you for that question, because it also gives me an opportunity to share a caveat with those numbers, because these numbers come from a time frame that includes a couple of years pre-COVID-19 pandemic, and so it's possible that we're overestimating the number of commuters, because we know now
Oh,
working
you're
from
probably
home.
underestimating.
Oh, interesting. You think more people are coming in now than before. That's helpful to know. Thank you.
Because of the housing price changes.
That makes sense. Thank you. We'll look for just a moment before I turn things over to my colleague Beth at what the future looks like. These are population forecasts from the Colorado State Demography Office for Garfield and Pitkin counties. Again, it wasn't possible to get population projections just for that specific section of Eagle County that is considered to be part of the Roaring Fork Valley. But we're not expected to see any huge increase in the number of young children here in Pitkin County in the future. The State Demographer's Office is actually forecasting a little bit of a decline in the number of young children between 2025 and 2040. Garfield County is forecast to see an increase, but it is, again, a relatively small fraction of folks who are commuting here and who want to have their kids in childcare here. So I wouldn't anticipate a huge influx in demand from Garfield County as that population grows. However, estimates are inherently uncertain, and childcare demand especially is very sensitive to things that are going on in the broader economy and society. So one extreme example of that is the COVID-19 pandemic. If we had done this needs assessment 10 years ago, nobody could have forecast what that would have done to people's employment situations or childcare situations. Less extreme examples are, as the unemployment rate goes up, you might see less demand for childcare if people are at home and are kind of tightening their belts financially. And so this is based on the best available data that's out there, but certainly there can be economic shifts, policy shifts that influence what demand will truly look like a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. And then another just caveat is that we collected these data this summer. We know there have been changes locally with the passage of the 7A ballot initiative, which will have implications for childcare in the region. There are also some changes to the financial aid policy that happened after we completed this. And so, again, it's sort of an ever-changing landscape, but we think that these are the best available data out there right now to help understand what demand currently looks like and could look like in the future. So I will pause there and turn things over to my colleague Beth, who's going to share a little bit of kind of put these numbers in context and talk about what they really mean for the childcare landscape here in Pitkin County and for the Burlingame childcare proposal as well. So Beth, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. And I can't see what's happening in the room, so if anyone needs to stop me, feel free to just jump in and I will pause. We summarized the conclusions from the report here for you. There's a lot more detail on all of these in the report itself, but I know it's always helpful to get the overview. So as Sarah pointed out, we do see that there is a need for additional infant and toddler care in Pitkin County based on the demographic data, the surveys, the focus groups, et cetera. Folks are struggling to find to find infant and toddler care. However, the supply of care for preschoolers seems to be more sufficient at this time. We saw that in the data that Sarah shared, as well as the conversations we had with providers and with families. And so that leads to some of these conclusions, which is the business model that providers operate under is tenuous. I'm sure that you all are aware of that, you've heard that. And typically what that means is that a private community provider relies on having preschool students enrolled in order to offset the costs of providing infant and toddler care. And that has to do with the ratios of adults to children that are required. And so in order for their financial model to be sustainable, they really do rely on having preschoolers. And one of the conclusions that we've made based on the information at this time, which, as Sarah said, things do shift, but we do believe that increasing the supply of preschool by adding a significant number of additional preschool slots could really negatively impact the financial sustainability of the providers that are currently providing care in the community. And so we can talk about that a little more as we go through here. As Sarah highlighted, we heard and we saw from families that they have unmet needs for childcare that have to do with availability for infants and toddlers, the affordability of care, hours of care that match their work schedules, and then location. We did ask folks about whether they prefer care near where they work or where they live. And it's pretty divided, actually. Parents really vary in what their preference is. But we did hear from many families that the current locations of care presented some challenges for them, especially those who commute long distances, as Sarah said. And so we really want to encourage you to think about any efforts to increase childcare capacity being aligned with the unmet needs of families and preserving the existing childcare supply. Adding additional childcare supply without efforts to preserve the care that currently exists are not going to create a net gain for the community. And so the final sort of conclusion related to that is in reviewing the plan for the Burlingame Child Care Center. We believe that the way it's envisioned with the addition of a significant number of preschool slots in addition to infant and toddler, there is some potential to harm the existing childcare infrastructure by contributing to an oversupply of preschool slots. And as Megan said, it sounds like you all have some upcoming discussion about where you want to head, and we'll provide you with a few considerations on the next few slides here. And so what we'd like to invite you to consider as you're thinking about next steps for the community is really thinking about how the creation of new slots might impact financial viability, staffing, and other key operational factors for childcare providers in the community. Thinking about flexibility, as Sarah pointed out, and as we know and have heard from providers in your community, from Nancy and Megan, who have watched this for a long time, in such a small place, demand can fluctuate. And so thinking about how the creation of new childcare supply can be designed flexibly so that as changes occur in the future, you might have facilities and operations that are designed to accommodate those needs. Thinking about that list of unmet needs for families, what kinds of resources might support those unmet needs. Thinking about workforce shortages. So certainly we weren't looking closely at workforce shortages, but conversations with providers made it very clear that that is one of the biggest pressure points for them, is having enough qualified staff to be fully enrolled, to have and to continue to provide care. So thinking about how efforts might support providers with addressing those workforce shortages. Definitely thinking about how the return on your investment of public dollars is contributing to supply. One metric, it is certainly not the only metric to utilize, but one metric is thinking about the number of licensed childcare slots that are created with the dollars that are invested. And then, as Sarah said, we all know, very exciting to see 7A pass. And we know that those efforts may create some shifts, and we certainly would encourage you to think about how that reflects where you might need to make additional investments in the future, and whether that's the same as it has been or might shift a little bit based on this additional regional funding. The next slide, please. This is our final slide, and then we'd love to have some discussion, questions and answers. And this is really just a summary of our recommendations to ensure that the existing supply is supported and sustained, to consider support for other types of care rather in addition to large scale centers, but thinking about the types of care that families use. Sarah talked a little bit about informal care, smaller scale centers, etc. Certainly continuing the support that you're providing through financial aid. I know that you all made a change to how that is being provided in the community over the course of this evaluation, and so monitoring those efforts and continuing to evaluate how families' needs are being met. It mentions outreach here. There's a little more detail in the report, but we definitely encountered folks who weren't familiar with how the financial aid resources work and thought that if they didn't live in Pitkin County, they couldn't have access to those. Or that if both parents weren't working in Pitkin County, that they couldn't have access. So certainly there's some additional opportunities with outreach to make sure folks have access to all the resources available. Certainly we would recommend that you engage with the regional efforts around 7A. The Roaring Fork Valley is very interconnected. I don't have to tell you that, but certainly considering what ways you can collaborate across the valley. And then we definitely would recommend a conversation and reevaluation of the Burlingame Plan to really ensure that it's supporting long-term sustainability for all childcare providers, existing and new, and thinking about how whatever you design and build is going to align with the needs of the community. So thank you for that. I'll turn it back to Sarah to facilitate some discussion, question and answer.
Thank you so much. I'll lead off with a couple of questions and then others having some questions or comments, as it were. Clearly the integration with the Early Childhood Education Coalition is, top of mind for me and for a lot of us in terms of how they're going to be using their resources and whether they're going to be building more child care centers in Garfield County and closer to where there's greater demand. Will they be doing teacher subsidies? Will they be doing other things? So it's really hard without knowing, and I'm not even sure when the first officers will be taking office, but we do have Stefan Reveal, and I think he's very qualified as a candidate from our district. So I'm looking forward to that. But kind of coming along those lines, I think we need a understanding of all the licensed child care facilities that are in Garfield County as far as where our community workforce comes from. I mean, maybe as far as Rifle or things like this, and as you said, there's a state list of licensed facilities, but to get an idea of how many infant and toddler spaces are there and how many are not, or for the older ones. And even for me, I'd love to have the list of the facilities in Pitkin County. and which are privately owned and which are publicly owned, because that's always been one of the challenges, is that you can be depending on a privately owned facility, and that operator can retire, selling the building, it's going to be converted to this, and you suddenly have a really big hole that you have to fill all at once. So I think we need that sort of resource list. And again, I think the number of centers and beds or spaces, as we call them, throughout the valley is really important information, both for our representative on the Early Childhood Center and for us to fully understand that dynamic. Those are kind of the two ones I see. And obviously, I think your recommendations for greater flexibility, because there is this wave of first it's all infants and then it's all preschool. Give it a few years, and it does go in waves. And I know it's hard to even begin to predict future numbers. It has so much to do with A, meeting the right partner and being in a stable relationship, but then B, financial concerns of families are paramount right now. Do I really have money to afford a second child? Do I really have money to get the first one through college? And, unfortunately, those are kind of national concerns we can't deal with. But the other factor is, do we really have housing? And so are people not having a second child or third child because they can't get a 3-bedroom, and things like that, or just afford it within our valley as a whole. So I just was going to say it's kind of interesting as we move forward to know this is just a very dynamic and shape-shifting type of issue, and we need to think about the outer sides of the envelope, so to speak. What could happen all the way this way, what could happen all the way this way, but mostly we want to keep it in the middle. So those are my general comments to be used. I do think about that Burlingame site, and there will become a time when we think about what really should happen to it. There could be just plain more housing built there. There was a lot of work put into the design site. Maybe it's designed more just to be that infant toddler facility without taking away the preschool income that the other centers face, and redesigned to have some housing for teachers in it or something like that. But I mean, there's no use going forward with a project where the demand is not there at this time or understanding it. So we'll have to take a look at those things. I see John, and then I go to Bill, and we'll come back around. John?
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to echo some of your comments. Last few times I've been out to Burlingame, I've noticed a ton of kids. I see the logic of having a child care center as close to where the children are as possible, but I almost feel like we may have missed the boat at Burlingame already.
Because they're already grown up.
Because and as you pointed out, this child care issue seems to come in waves. I would also note that the Burlingame location is not ideal for parents driving up Valley from Garfield County or Eagle County, which, as it seems, we're going to be having more of those people, which will just accelerate the pinch point at the lumberyard. And as we've seen from recent APSHA data that our affordable housing residents tend to age in place, this child care facility, I think, would be built in the wrong place. I think moving forward, though, we should be thinking about having a child care facility maybe ready for when the lumberyard starts accepting residents and people start building families out there, instead of waiting until we're too late there as well. That's it for now.
Very good. Bill?
Thanks. I think I agree with everything said so far. I don't think that this is a physical problem today, as much as it might be a logistical problem or a financial problem. And so, firstly, I don't think we need to spend the time in January on a more detailed work session on the Burlingame Center. Let's hear what everyone else has to say, but I'm not sure that's a productive use of our time if we don't think that that needs to happen right now. Secondly, what I didn't hear you get into is why infant and toddler is such a problem. I assume it's because it's it's very expensive to operate because the teacher-to-student ratio is so high, or so low, I suppose. So, what can we be doing differently to help support that, to create more supply, is really the biggest question that I would have for you as a team is, I don't think the physical limitations are the issue. It's more, how can we help the operators make that profitable and incentivize them to create more of that supply? So that's really what I would say is the most important next step for us. You've identified what the issue is and what the sort of supply gap is. So let's help incentivize more of that supply. Let's not focus on building new buildings. Thanks.
Thank you. Bill? Christine or Sam? Who wants to go?
I can go.
Okay, thank you.
One point of clarification. First of all, the report is really well done and so thorough, so thank you. That was a lot of work that went into this. I did not see Little Red mentioned in here, and I think that they're redeveloping and doubling capacity as well. Is that correct and on radar? So that also addresses some of this capacity issue. Do they have an infant and toddler space?
They do. So they are basically doubling capacity. I think they're breaking ground this coming spring. I think they are going from, is it 35 kids to maybe 60 or so slots, and they will have an infant and toddler center.
Okay. I think that's just good information for everybody up here.
Yeah.
None of this was really surprising to me, having been kind of involved in this in the past couple of years. So
And a parent?
as a parent, as a consumer. So thank you for the information, and I will always be on the advocate side of this for preserving, as you said, the programs that we have, helping teachers, supporting retention, giving money to families and childcare providers to make this more easily accessible and affordable. I don't like seeing the line that says the number of children in our community is going down. A sign of a healthy community is having representation in every demographic. And so I want to do whatever we can to try to encourage families to stay here and to help providers provide the continuing quality care that they are.
Good.
Yeah, I was going to say the information from you guys in Kids First is just incredibly valuable in informing decisions up here when it comes to this type of thing. And it's sort of been just sitting here thinking about you guys are kind of like stay the course. And it feels weird not being as proactive as we usually like to be on certain issues. And I'm just trying to think like how we can be forward thinking and not miss the boat on potentially the next wave. I do think there will be at least somewhat of a growth in affordable housing in this community over the next decade or two, and what that means. And hopefully we can focus on things like affordability that allows families to live here and have more than one child. So I guess I just look at you guys and say thank you so much for the information you provided, and keep thinking in a forward manner, because just what is true from the data that you provided might be different tomorrow.
That's true.
Can I throw out one
Please,
additional
yeah.
thought that came up when you were giving the presentation? Is flexible for families, something that struck me is not just flexible in providers, but hours and availability, and not necessarily having to put a kid in care for 8 hours a day, but having, I don't know if we could look at some sort of creative solution of trying to fund a drop-off situation or a co-working area where people can go work for a couple hours and have childcare. We know that those parents want to work, but maybe they're not ready to sign up for 4 or 5 days a week. So that might be one solution in trying to plug the holes in the system.
Yeah, that also brings up something I was thinking about, and it's more of a challenge, but the working hours issue. And it would be a question to see if there's any providers who you might be able to pay more for saying, can you stay up until 7 o'clock at night and have a split shift or something like that? And really, you're not going to do it with all the providers, but if you could do that to be able to say, well, this is the provider who has hours till 7 o'clock, Monday through Friday, or something like that. I just don't know, but I think that coming from the report, it's going to take a lot of brainstorming of what to do with the unmet needs with the resources we have and the new coalition has.
Correct. And I mean, we can come up with lots of great ideas, and the child care providers themselves are the ones who have to operate till 7 p.m.
Right.
And staff that.
I understand.
And so that's a whole nother,
Well,
variable.
that's what I'm just saying, if you could find one operator who would be willing to do that or who could do that, and we could kind of reinforce the dollars that make that happen, it'd just be, a pilot program or something to see how many parents really take advantage of it, or for the ones coming home late, they really would rather have their center closer to their home. We
Yeah,
just don't
and
know.
that's one of the reasons we wanted to come back to you in January, was to come up with a bunch of ideas of ways to either support existing programs or modify the Burlingame design and move forward with that. So that's, I know, Bill, you said you don't really want to come back in January and talk about it, but we would like you to consider, because we have a lot of ideas, and we think you all have a lot of great ideas. And so
We won't cancel it, but we'll make sure it's a really nice, tight agenda, and we move forward with some creative ideas. And it'll be a broader childcare discussion other than just the Burlingame. Because if it's
Wonderful.
not that site, then it really leads to needing a lot of other discussion.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other kind of comments or?
I would just, again, advocate for not spending our time on this in January. If the majority up here doesn't want to build a facility anytime soon, why are we talking about what the building looks like?
Well, I'd like to understand that some of the ideas that she mentioned, repurposing and doing it differently. It's not just, has to be the original building up or down, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, it's either that or say, okay, come back in April with all the ideas that you've come from this. I mean, this is about the other ways to reach the unmet need, not just the Burlingame site. I think we all probably agree with you in general that the larger facility for 95 kids is potentially upsetting the pro forma for the operators we have now. And that's kind of why I want the list of the other operators to know how many are really going to be around in the future, and how many have sold their business to an operator who then really doesn't like doing it 2 or 3 years later. It's just to know. It's kind of like dancing on ice floes. You're jumping from one to another, and the waters are moving all the time. So, John?
I just want to be clear that I do think evaluating the need for a child care center out there is still valuable information for us. I'd hate to have spent all this time working on this problem just to drop the ball, because we have been looking at this for years now. So I look forward to the evaluation. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good. We'll go on to our next item.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did forget to tell you that we left a bunch of reports.
Oh,
If people want hard copies of the reports, we can. Thank you.
yeah, please leave one for me. I don't know if others,
I'll take one too.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and
Yeah.
City Council.
We're
My
here.
name is Tricia Aragon. I'm the city engineer, and before we get into the presentation, I'll have the team introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Kyla Smith. I'm a project manager with the engineering department.
I'm PJ Murray, and I'm the Stormwater and Clean River Program Manager.
And I am Andrew Earls with Wright Water Engineers. I am the consultant for the city working on the stormwater manual.
So tonight we'll be discussing the Clean River Program and necessary updates to our urban runoff management plan. It really is fitting that we're talking about this tonight on a day that we actually got some snow. All that snow melt is going somewhere, and the URMP, or Urban Runoff Management Plan, is our playbook for making sure it gets there in a way that protects the Roaring Fork River. To get into some history of the program, Aspen's commitment to protecting the Roaring Fork River goes back more than 50 years. In the early 70s, the city developed its first urban runoff management plan, and at that time it focused on reducing pollution from urban runoff and to prevent property damage from flooding. By 2001, we had a clearer picture of those risks. We did a master plan of Aspen Mountain and that drainage basin. And what that showed is most of the downtown storm system didn't have enough capacity for even the smallest events without flooding nearby properties. That work also highlighted the potential of mud flow coming off of Aspen Mountain into our downtown area. In 2005 and 2006, local studies confirmed what we thought was that as development increased, more runoff from streets and buildings were carrying pollutants into the Roaring Fork River. And then additionally, the diversions off of the Roaring Fork River reduced or made water quality and habit conditions even more vulnerable. So recognizing these challenges, Aspen's residents decided to act, and in 2007, the voters approved a dedicated funding source for the stormwater program. And as a result, the city established the Clean River and Stormwater Program. So the work that we're talking about today isn't new. It's the latest chapter in a long community-driven effort to protect the Roaring Fork River, to reduce flood risk, and responsibly manage stormwater in Aspen.
So the Clean River Program and Stormwater Program, they're often used as synonyms. So you'll probably hear both tonight. But the purpose of this program is to protect the health of the Roaring Fork River. And we do this through programmatic efforts, capital projects, as well as policy. And one of the backbone documents for the policy work is this URMP that we're talking about tonight. And as Tricia mentioned, it is the playbook for how development manages rain and snowmelt. Keeping this plan current is essential. It's one of the key ways that we protect the river and our infrastructure, as well as the people downstream. And Aspen, as a headwaters community, we really carry this unique responsibility, and this manual helps us uphold that. The URMP provides the standards and guidance for managing and treating stormwater runoff as development occurs. Things like conveyance requirements, water quality capture volume, treatment, and detention are all part of this manual. And you'll hear the term water quality treatment or water quality capture volume. What we are referring to is this concept of the first flush. And every runoff event that, whether it's rain or snow melt, when it's really dry, pollutants accumulate on the surface. And that first flush captures them all and takes them straight to the river. So we are looking at this first about 1/4 inch of runoff when we talk about treatment. And designing for that small but really critical volume is what helps us maintain the long-term health of the river and its tributaries. So the URMP applies to all development and redevelopment within city limits, and it establishes the treatment and detention requirements for each project. Aspen is seen as a leader in stormwater management for the Western Slope, and many nearby communities look to our standards when they're developing their own or if they lack a manual of their own. We consistently hear that working within Aspen's requirements is actually easier and clearer than many other jurisdictions, which was great feedback for us when we started some outreach for this project. So the requirements vary based on which drainage basin the project falls within, the scope of work, and whether a stormwater system, there's a system or there are improvements nearby to the project site. So the table on this slide shows or summarizes these requirements. So a project that disturbs 200 to 1,000 square feet is considered a minor project, and they just demonstrate there's no adverse drainage impacts. A project that disturbs 1,000 square feet or more is considered a major project, and interior remodels affecting 50% or more of the structure is also classified as major. And these major projects are required to treat the water quality capture volume, again, that first flush, and in some cases detention depending on which basin they're in.
Great, well, thank you. I'm going to cover the next few slides to talk a little bit about why we treat stormwater in Aspen and some different methods. But first, I wanted to give just a little more of an introduction for those of you who may not know me. I know some of you from past meetings I've been in, but it's been a little while since I've been before the Aspen City Council. I, again, am Andrew Earls, and I work for a company called Right Water Engineers. I've worked there since I started as an intern, actually, in 1998. So I've been there for quite a while. And my whole career is focused around stormwater management and drainage. I have worked on the Mile High Flood District's criteria manual, and I have been the project manager for updates to that manual since the mid-2000s. And we just went through a major update a few years ago to all of the water quality criteria that was published in 2024, which is one of the reasons for updating this manual now, as well as a few others that I'm working on.
Is that slide picture from Aspen, or you got that from somewhere else?
Which picture?
This one.
This one's from Aspen. This is an outfall to the Roaring Fork. So yeah, this is a real
Oh,
Aspen.
we had that graffiti down there, too.
Could be old.
It may have gotten cleaned up. I think it's a little bit of an older picture, but I do know this is an outfall to the Roaring Fork. I didn't stick a Denver picture in here for
Okay.
you. So good question, Rachel. But anyway, I worked on the last version of the URMP update and was one of the lead consultants for that. And since then, I've been an on-call consultant working with the city, doing mud flow studies, drainage studies, and here we are updating the URMP again. I would also mention that the Right Water's project manager for the URMP update, Drake Ludwig, is sitting in the audience tonight. He wanted to hear what you all had to say about this issue as well. And in addition, I've done some interesting work around the world, believe it or not. I've actually done some drainage engineering in Babylon, Iraq, at Angkor Wat, Machu Picchu, just to name a few.
Wow.
That's kind of a story for another day, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background in case you were wondering who I am and why I'm here. But I'm here because I do have a bit of continuity with this project and have been involved in water quality and issues in Aspen for a long time. And really, the reasons that we treat stormwater runoff are multifaceted. And, you know, we are trying to reduce the impact of urban runoff on the river. That's the water quality side of things that we'll talk about. The hydrologic changes also have impacts on the river. In other words, when you create impervious surfaces and you generate more runoff than there was before, that also can cause problems in rivers. And we want to control the sediment and pollutant load. And the way that we do that is really by controlling the sediment load. And I'll show you in just a minute, but a lot of other pollutants that are in stormwater runoff are actually attached to the sediments. So if we can remove sediments, we're also usually removing nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as some metals like copper, zinc, and things like that. So I have a couple slides on that in a minute. Managing urban runoff also mitigates flood risk, which obviously can cause a lot of damages. And really the combination of doing those three things listed above helps to ensure the ecological integrity of the river. You know, we obviously think of stormwater from human health impacts, but you also have to think about it from the standpoint of the little organisms that live beneath the rocks in the river that the fish feed on. And those organisms, aquatic organisms, can be very sensitive to sediment, metals, and other changes in stormwater quality. Next slide, please. So I'm going to geek out on you here for just a few minutes and show you a box and whisker plot. I apologize in advance. I'm going to explain what this is, though. This is a plot that is showing some water quality data. This is for a parameter we call total suspended solids. So this would effectively be sediment that is carried in stormwater runoff. It could be washed off from dry deposition on a roof. It could be washed off from landscaping areas. It could be washed off from a lot of different sources. And what this is showing you, so if you look at the vertical axis on this figure, that is showing you the concentration of suspended solids in milligrams per liter. So, it's mass per volume. That's how much is in the water. And those two figures in the middle, one is labeled number 1 and one is labeled number 2. The plot for number 1 represents data, and these are hundreds, if not thousands, of data points in the National Stormwater Quality Database for freeways and industrial sites. On the right-hand side, the data are lumped together for commercial, institutional, residential, and open space sites. And the reason the person doing this analysis did it that way is because they have similar characteristics in terms of total suspended solids. Now, what these data are showing, I'm going to start with the red label. That red line right across the middle that's right near 100 milligrams per liter, that's what we call the median concentration. It's a typical concentration. It represents the central tendency of the data, and that's normally what we would base our criteria on. And you can see it's not all that different for freeways and industrial sites versus commercial, residential, and open space. It's actually fairly similar. Now, the gray box that you see on each of these figures, that represents 50% of the data. 50% of the data collected fall within those boxes. And again, you can see that the box is maybe a little bit bigger for number 2, but it covers, a fairly similar range to the same box that freeways and industrial sites do. Now, finally, you see all those black dots kind of going up or below the boxes. Those are the full range of the data. And what that shows you is the minimum to the maximum of the data recorded. And stormwater runoff, people that work on that know that it's extremely variable. But, for a residential site, this data shows that you could have concentrations from less than 1 milligram per liter to about 10,000 milligrams per liter, which would look like chocolate milk. So anyway, I wanted to show you this. And the main reason I show you this is to just make the point that it's really important. We might think that residential areas are pretty clean. They're not like industrial sites or factories or highways. But for many types of pollutants, they are. They are sources of pollutants. And just because they don't look like a freeway doesn't mean that they don't deliver some of the same types of pollutants that you could get from some of those other types of land uses. And this is really what we're seeking to keep out of the Roaring Fork River with the work that we're doing. Next slide. I included this slide. This was from some research also from the National Stormwater Quality Database, but just to provide you with some ideas of where do these things come from. As I mentioned, many of the metals like copper and zinc often are associated with the sediments. Some of them are also dissolved, but those are much harder to remove from stormwater. So we try to remove the ones that are attached to sediments. And you can see that, certainly some street and automotive uses are listed on here, but there also are some that are, more typical residential uses. For example, roofing materials can be a big source of copper, especially if you have copper roofs. Treated lumber actually is a source of copper. And zinc can come from a lot of galvanized things, which you see all over the place in urban areas. So there are plenty of these sources in urban areas, just like the city of Aspen, and that is, again, another reason why we're trying to treat this in stormwater runoff, because these pollutants can really come from many different locations in our urban environment. Next. So how do we treat these? Well, this slide is actually probably the most common method that is currently used in Aspen for treating stormwater runoff, both for water quality and often for detention too. And that is a dry well. I assume most of you all are familiar with dry wells. Some parts of Colorado with poor soils, we tend not to recommend these because they rely on infiltration. But the city of Aspen is blessed with soils that actually have pretty good infiltration capacity. So these, along with other types of BMPs or stormwater control measures, SCMs is an acronym we use to talk about practices to treat stormwater runoff. Aspen has actually really good conditions for implementing those compared to a lot of places in Colorado. And we did some calculations based on those median concentrations of TSS, how much runoff would be treated on an annual basis. And we figured out that for one of those, and this is an estimate, of course, but a typical dry well over a 30-year life would probably remove on the order of 350 pounds of sediment, as well as the pollutants, nutrients, and metals that are associated with that sediment. And the city did a calculation actually extrapolating that to the entire West End. And if that whole area were treated using these or similar methods, you could be really talking about a lot of sediment, 15,000 pounds of sediment along with the other associated pollutants. But dry wells are not the only way to treat runoff. There are some other ways to do it, and this is a stormwater control measure that we refer to as a receiving pervious area. And because I'm an engineer, we call it RPA because we engineers just have to add acronyms to everything. But what RPA is, I'm sure you all have heard the terms buffers before and swales. Receiving pervious areas are just kind of a catch-all term for any vegetated area that receives runoff from an impervious surface. Because what happens when an impervious surface drains across a pervious area, you have an opportunity for some of that runoff to infiltrate. The vegetation also filters the runoff and allows some of the sediments to drop out. And in some cases, you can get full treatment of your water quality volume using just receiving pervious areas. The other reason I include these here on this slide in Aspen is because I know a lot of times you guys build a lot of stuff underground, and sometimes on lots there's more to it than what you see above the ground. Well, these are the types of BMPs that you could use above an underground structure, with soil placed on top of it, obviously with adequate waterproofing, but that would essentially be like a green roof over a subgrade structure, and that would be a very effective way to provide treatment while also providing a usable surface area on the yard that you're working on. Next slide. Okay, and this is another one, and these are permeable pavements, and this is actually a picture I took about a month ago when I was up here at Aspen after I had lunch. I really like the beautiful bench out here. This is right across from Petke Park. These are nice permeable pavements, and permeable pavements, again, are another infiltration-based stormwater control measure, but what they do is they infiltrate the runoff. And what you do for permeable pavements is you can treat the water quality by storing it underground and either infiltrating it into the subsurface or slowly releasing it. If you make these deep enough, you can also provide detention storage using permeable pavements. The Mile High Flood District Manual has some good criteria for that we just updated also as a part of our 2024 update there. So again, this provides a multifunctional surface that you can do other things with in addition to just managing stormwater. And we know that space is valuable in Aspen, so you really need to have multifunctional spaces where you can.
Let me ask, how do these work with this type of freeze-thaw cycle we have, and do they end up buckling and being uneven?
If you design the subgrade correctly, Ms. Richards, they work just fine. Actually, they melt out faster than conventional pavements. And what you need to do, though, is to have enough space beneath them in terms of the subgrade. We specify a certain type of aggregate that has to go in there, and that will allow air to circulate. And I have seen these, actually. I went to northern Iowa a few years ago, which is a place where, surprisingly, they have more permeable pavements than you might imagine having anywhere. And they have really, really long, hard winters, kind of like you have in Aspen, only probably not quite as much solar insulation. And they have told me, and I've seen this too in publications, that those actually melt out far faster than the conventional pavements, and that they often don't even have to scrape those areas. Okay. So they can function very well in cold climates. Now, I would not use pervious asphalt in this climate. I wouldn't even use that in Denver. It'll fall apart immediately. Same with permeable concrete. But if you use these block pavers, they do very well in cold climates. So, thank you. Okay, and then the last one I'm going to talk about before I hand it back over. I think I'm handing it over to Kyla, but are rain gardens, or what we also call bioretention. And these, the picture on the left-hand side you probably recognize. That's just outside of the building that we're in, that's a small rain garden. The thing that's nice about rain gardens is they can be landscaped to look attractive. and they also can provide infiltration, although if you need to situate it over a subgrade space, or if you had an underground garage under there, you can line these and put in an under drain, and they can work very well like that. I've seen them. The one on the right-hand side is actually for where I live in Boulder. That's a rain garden. This is in North Boulder, and pretty high-end development, you know, $3 million houses, which is pretty high-end for Boulder. And what they've done is they've made it a very attractive complement to the front yard landscape, and it provides the water quality and detention for this development, and it also looks good and provides people with something that they don't mind looking at out of their front door. So those are just a few examples to show how types of stormwater control measures that I personally think can work very well in Aspen, and some that have been proven to work very well in Aspen. And with that, Kyla, over to you.
Thank you.
Andrea. Yeah.
I just said thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for going over these stormwater control measures, and that really highlights one of the main, apologies.
Start again.
One of our main pillars of this update is modernizing these stormwater control measures. As Andrew mentioned, for a couple of these, they've made updates to permeable pavement requirements in Mile High Flood District. There's also been updates to how we can use pervious surfaces and receiving pervious areas that are not currently options within our URMP. And we want to provide these kinds of modern stormwater control measures. Some of the other pillars that we're using to direct this update are just broader technical updates and improving the readability and usability of this manual. To kind of dig more in, because our manual was last updated in 2014, there have been actually significant gains in technology and just use case for stormwater control measures. And we want to increase that flexibility and ingenuity available to our engineers and into our development community. We want to be able to utilize the green space above the basement. That's not currently something that can be utilized with our current manual, and that's a situation we see a lot of in our development community here, and we want to provide that as an option. And we want to be able to let engineers be more creative, provide more options for green infrastructure on our development projects, and give people the ability to kind of piecemeal different solutions that'll fit their different project types, sizes, and budgets. And for some of the technical updates, we see updates in scientific data for rainfall and runoff over years. Data is constantly being collected. Rainfall numbers are changing as climate is changing. And so we want to update these kinds of data within our manual in a way that makes it evergreen so that we're not always feeling like our technical data is behind. We also want to incorporate mud flow data that we've done with Wrightwater in past years, and we also want to incorporate revegetation methods when we're looking at vegetating those rain gardens or just re-vegging the construction site as a whole. And our final overarching goal of this manual update is improving the readability and the usability. Currently, our manual reads very much like a textbook, and while the engineers have told us that they love that, not only engineers use our manual, we have plenty of times architects and planners coming to us looking to understand the requirements and be able to communicate kind of the intent around our manual. Why are we having to do these stormwater control measures? Why are we having to do this? And we want to be able to provide greater clarity on thresholds and policies and improve that permit user experience with our manual. Included in that is when our manual is currently utilized very frequently online, and we want to provide those digital features that allow it to be searchable and way more easy to navigate and flip through. And so to just kind of summarize and restate, staff's recommendation is to reaffirm support for the 25 URMP manual update with these kind of three guiding principles: modernizing stormwater control measures, updating these technical components, and improving the readability and usability of the manual.
So I'll close by bringing it back to our mission. This URMP advances our mission. We'll do that by modernizing stormwater control measures, or SCMs, updating the technical backbone of the plan, and making the manual more readable and usable for everyone who relies on it. With that said, we're looking for your confirmation that this is the right direction for the URMP update, and we're happy to answer any questions or hear about any feedback you may have.
Great. John, you want to start?
Yeah, I just had a couple questions. With the dry wells, what happens when they're full? Can you get the sediment out, or do you need to replace the whole dry well?
They can be maintained, yes, and you probably wouldn't want to wait 30 years before you maintain it. Typically, every few years you would monitor it for sediment accumulation, and then typically what you do, you could bring in like one of those Vector trucks to suck it out. That's a pretty typical way to maintain a dry well.
Okay, cool, thanks. Second question was, there was a study done, I think back in the mid-'80s when Aspen Mountain was experiencing we had a big snow year and the mountain was saturated and there was movement. I think there was a study done by a firm called Chin and Associates, and I wondered if you were able to get your eyes on it.
I think I know what you're talking about. In Chin, they would have been looking at a landslide situation, I think. As a water engineer, I deal with debris flows and mud flows, but I don't really get as much into landslides. But I am aware that there have been landslide studies done along the toe of the mountains, affecting some of the buildings that have been built up closer to the ski slope from what I've seen. And I think there actually are some instrumentation out there these days that are monitoring those landslides. I know when you all may remember April Long, who was a former stormwater manager. I recall working with her and looking at some data from they had these tensiometers that basically tell you how stuff is moving. But it's been a while since I've looked at that. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure it's as much of a stormwater issue, though, as a geotechnical issue to be aware of, and be sure that we're flagging that when you have to review projects to know if you're in one of those areas.
Yeah, we have done a landslide analysis. That was probably 10 years ago that we did that, using those inclinometers, and we know now where those risks are, and we do require when a property develops in those areas that they do monitor that before and during construction so that we're not negatively impacting that landslide issue.
Right. Now, I have concerns about snowmaking pipes bursting because we've had incidents on Aspen Mountain and on Buttermilk where homes were flooded. Country Day experienced a mudslide because of faulty infrastructure.
I do recall, it couldn't be accurate, but at the time of that study, the ski company changed its practices for after the season had closed and not pushing the snow in certain areas and things like that because there was that concern. And what was it? It was brought forward, particularly when the Ritz-Carlton hole was there and before they finished building it, that is this whole mountain going to slide into that with a big weather event, but it never happened. But I do know there were some management practices about the winter road, the summer road up and how they plowed and things like that. Do you have any other questions, John?
I don't. That's it for me.
Well, we'll come back around. Bill?
I'm happy to go, thanks. Thank you for the thorough presentation and walking us through all this. I appreciate it. I think that there's a lot of good progress in here, and overall I'm fairly supportive of this, particularly the modernization of the mitigation techniques. I think engineers that I work with have been sort of clamoring for this type of stuff for a long time, and when I asked them for feedback on this in particular, they really gave you a nod for that, so thank you. I think it'll be put to good use and will generate even better results for the goal here. Could you please put up on the screen the attachment on the agenda that you had about the disturbance thresholds? This is something that I struggle with that I'd like to talk through with everybody. And make sure that everyone understands the sort of impact of this. So particularly here, what I struggle with is that there are interior remodel thresholds that are triggering major exterior construction work that wouldn't otherwise occur necessarily. So, for example, and I'm sure our team can give us other examples and different examples that they've seen, but if someone wanted to remodel a townhouse, they were only doing interior work, only proposing interior work, but the work was more than 50% of the interior of the project. The way that our current code reads and is proposed to continue to read is that that would trigger you to upgrade your stormwater infrastructure to today's code. There would be no backhoe on the site otherwise in this example that I'm giving. There would be no, serious exterior work happening. And I think that we're creating as big, if not a bigger impact on the community by requiring that exterior construction than we would be to the stormwater by doing nothing at all. And I take issue with this. I think it's an overreach. I think that if you look at the full cycle of the impact from an environmental standpoint, I don't think that we're getting a return on investment. This just doesn't resonate with me or make sense to me at all if somebody's only proposing interior work. I get that if you're doing an addition to a project or major exterior reconstruction, changing every window in a structure, things like that, you could make an argument that it's reasonable to upgrade to today's standards, the stormwater infrastructure. But when someone's proposing only an interior work, I don't think this is appropriate at all, and I think we should really reconsider it.
Thank you for that comment. I raised my questions as well. Would you like to respond as to why interior work is being considered in this, or is it already in this and you're just kind of continuing current practice?
I'd like to have PJ talk about the philosophy about interior remodels and why we have that trigger in our manual.
Okay, yeah.
So there's a couple of things at play, but the first one is, the first thought I have in responding is often we see drywalls as the SCM of choice in Aspen, but a part of this manual's goal, the update, is to look at alternatives. So it could be, Andrew talked about receiving pervious areas and making that easier to access, and maybe it's disconnecting downspouts and draining to green space. So that is one intent of this update, but the reason we have a threshold for interior remodels is because when the manual was first developed, the council at the time and the citizens group that helped develop these thresholds, the question was asked, and I'll paraphrase, was, what level do we want for our protection on the Roaring Fork River? And at the time, it was supportive of interior remodels because when somebody does a significant interior remodel, they're likely not coming back for a scrape and replace anytime soon. And this is a way to incrementally treat more properties than if we're just looking at scrape and replaces or larger scale projects. And these interior remodels are essentially, they can be extremely impactful. And so this threshold helps to capture all of these projects that are impactful. And if we removed the interior 50% threshold, we would probably not see those properties come in and we would not see as much treatment happening in town as quickly.
So as a town that's mostly developed, that's a lot of what we see are remodels. And so if we want to capture, that part of the city that is redeveloping, that's a way to capture that. This is to ensure that we are treating as much of town without doing undue burden on smaller properties and trying to look for those bigger impact properties like a redevelopment, or not, a remodel of at least 50%.
Thank you for that.
Can I ask some follow-ups?
Yeah.
This would apply to all types of structures, including affordable housing, correct?
It currently does, yes.
Thank you. And in your memo, you talked about the average cost of this infrastructure, right? Sorry, it slipped my mind. So, $115,000, 453. Is that right?
Yes.
Correct.
To add stormwater infrastructure. So we want people to maintain their affordable housing. a 50% interior remodel. That's talking about things like changing lighting. That's if you're opening up the ceiling to modernize lighting, reconfigure bedrooms and bathrooms. All that counts towards the 50%. So now we're putting this from a financial standpoint. I think that the bigger impact here is actually the sort of construction disturbance standpoint, but from a financial standpoint, we can be forcing people to add $115,000 on average of stormwater infrastructure to a project just from remodeling the interior. It's just not reasonable from my perspective at all.
Yeah, I kind of have a different take on that a little bit. I can't see affordable housing unless it's a single-family home. It's really much more of a homeowner's complex, and it's going to be important for them not to flood their buildings. And as an affordable housing resident, I want to do my share to keep the river clean as much as anyone else. I wouldn't see creating an exemption for them, although you might be using that as an example for the larger program. To me, it's kind of like if a person's demolishing and rebuilding, we let them. They have to come up to the new electric codes. I mean, excuse me, not demolish. I used the wrong word. If they're remodeling and we're going to say you have to come up to the current electric code, the fire code. You can't just put in old water fixtures if there's new water fixtures required. And so this is about coming up to code with what might be your land and your property around it. But if we're just waiting for demolitions across the town to pull this up, I think that we'd be waiting a very long time. And I just come at it with a slightly different point of view, Bill, and I understand you're looking at development and redevelopment costs, and I'm looking at we have and should always preserve a gold medal fishery here in the Roaring Fork River. And I know what it means for communities to find themselves on the 303D impaired streams list. And that is much more dangerous here because, as they've talked about, the water that's removed from our rivers to begin with, the diversions, and then the drought combined. There's the old saying that dilution is the solution to pollution, but we no longer have as much dilution ability, and we're also having rising temperatures in the water. So the issue of the total suspended solids and dissolved oxygen and all those things mean a lot to me. At the county level, when people were permitting for a snow storage site in the winter, we made sure that that area would be tested for hydrocarbons in the spring, or how much it had accumulated, or we wouldn't permit it anymore because we didn't want the hydrocarbons getting into the river. So, every little piece of our modern lives, whether it's driving your car and sending out microplastics and tire shreds, or even just the dirt that comes off our cars, I think it's incredibly important to do as much as we can as a community, as everyone has a part of this problem. And not to keep going on, I'll let it go real quick here, but I was taking a walk down the Rio Grande Trail this weekend on Saturday, and I saw the team out there probably doing the last leg of the stormwater drainage cleanup that went all the way down Mill Street, and they had to clean the pipes all the way down of all this sediment, all this debris, before it gets to the settling pond, the Jenny Adair Park. And so they were on the last leg of that, cleaning out that last leg of incredible siltation and dirt and muck and keeping it from the river. The same with the John Denver Sanctuary, with a big drainage vault being put in there. So to me, the less that comes off of anybody's property and then requires us to clean those pipes out like that, is the better. They're all doing their part towards that system. So again, I can understand some differences. There's always cost with a remodel, but it reminds me of the clean air ordinances we had on restaurants, and the cost of a new grill that would prevent this air pollution. It's going to be monstrous. And it's like, yeah, but you just spent $4 million remodeling the interior because you didn't like the interior. But the things that had to do with the environment and taking care of our natural surroundings, that kind of falls to the bottom of the list as an extra. but it's not an extra. It's our obligation as a community. So I'm okay with it, and, but I do appreciate you raising it, and I'm wondering if, because this is what strikes me from what you're saying. You have someone who's on a site and they have lots of impervious area, and it's just a matter of getting better storm drain droughts. They're not going to be forced to do a whole bunch of everything. Maybe it's the terminology that you use in this, you know, of a full grading plan. Is that what's really needed? Or, and maybe it is for some sites, but for other sites, is it going to be that big of a deal? Can it be simple recommendations or suggestions required by ComDev staff to a specific site versus saying, oh, you have to go out and do a big plan and bring it back into us? I just don't know. That's how I would pull it forward from here. Sam?
I just want to reiterate again, or ask again, that this 50% threshold for interiors is the current code?
Correct.
Yeah, so, and it's been going on for how long now?
I mean, at least since 2008, when this,
Okay.
So it's not a change.
No, I guess the biggest thing is, like, hypothetically, I very much agree with you as far as thinking why are interiors affecting the outside. At the same time, for any sort of policy change, since this is the status quo, I guess I would want to see concrete examples where this has been the detriment that you speak to. Go ahead. No, you can respond. That's
Christine,
right.
can I use your residential
Yep,
situation as an example? Would that be
immediately
okay?
what came to mind.
Oh, okay. See, because I didn't have any
Correct me if I'm
examples,
wrong.
that's why.
But you live in Smuggler,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
Would it be a significant deterrent to you to remodel your affordable housing asset of this community's and your own if you knew that it was going to come with a $115,000 bill on the exterior when you're proposing only interior work?
Yes.
My question, though, knowing Smuggler, is like, is that one property really going to cost $115,000 in stormwater
It costs
repair?
$500,000. Each property's unique, that's an average.
Well,
I don't know where
wait,
that data came from, but.
Yeah, I actually knew someone who had to put a storm dry well in their Smuggler so that their basement didn't flood when we had a supercell parking over Smuggler Mountain and it all came down to Smuggler. So there's a point at which are you telling someone you're all at your own risk?
They may have
Because
had, Rachel, they may have had specific foundation issues in their property. I'm talking about treatment of stormwater and
I know,
nothing else.
That's what I'm saying,
And
and
that's
there
triggered by
is
interior
that's why there was dry wells were
aesthetic work.
required on this person's lot when they were pulling out their old mobile home and putting in a new one. It wasn't a $115,000 plan, it was installing one dry well. I don't know if we need more concrete examples, or does everyone need to do a $115,000 plan? Or is this what you're talking about when someone's totally doing a demolition project and it's a whole new site and a whole new grading that goes with a new structure?
so the urban runoff management plan has evolved since 2008. So when we were originally looking at requirements for properties, we were looking at like full detention of everyone, including the Smuggler Trailer Park or Smuggler Park. And it's now changed, at least in the Aspen Basin, is like those properties only need to provide the water quality capture volume, which is
Quarter inch of runoff,
a quarter,
roughly.
yes. And so that's what needs to be treated. So because our manual does direct you towards using dry wells, and that's like the easy button, and people have been using dry wells. That's why we want to offer these options. It doesn't have to be a dry well. We can do other options,
Right.
like receiving
Pervious area.
pervious areas.
Or rain gardens or permeable
Well,
pavements.
let's just take it as a hypothetical. Someone has bought a older mobile home in Aspen Village, Smuggler, and they're going to pull it out and put in a brand-new home. Will they have to do a $115,000 water management plan to put it on an existing lot in Smuggler?
I'm going to let Kyla answer it, but before she answers it, I want to say there's an existing system at Smuggler Park. So there's an existing storm system. So because you have an existing system, we would require.
It would just require water quality capture volume, which is a much smaller volume than detention. And $115,000 is an average for a dry well-based project, and it's just from a small sample size from a local contractor. They did include one project that used a rain garden bioretention area as its primary detention source, and that project was only $50,000 for the actual construction cost. And that's because there wasn't extensive digging involved, and there's not additional shoring
But
components.
were these about an interior remodel, or were they new construction that ended up with this sort of?
They were, the project samples we looked at were a mix of new construction and remodels. I do have an example I pulled just from our data on Salesforce, our permit process recently.
Okay.
This was a historic home. This is off of Bleecker. The lot size is 3,000 square feet. It had a soil disturbance of only 600. So this would be a project that would not have triggered a major level grading and drainage plan for the exterior work. But they did do a 68% interior remodel. And for the purposes of the URMP definition, that is a level 2 building alteration. That's changing around significant plumbing. That's demolishing demising walls. That's doing really big changes. It's not just doing finishing. If you're only doing finishing and you're putting out cabinets and you're putting different cabinets back in, that isn't considered an interior remodel by our definition. The value of this project provided by the applicant was only $2 million. They did just a pervious pavement system under their walkway with an under drain system. And looking at the average cost for a green infrastructure, because this didn't involve significant digging, it was probably closer to that $50,000 range for the actual physical construction costs, and you're looking only at about 2.5% of the total project value when looking at this threshold. They were already, in this case, doing exterior work, and so it's not a true just interior remodel. But in this case, they did have to do stormwater compliance, but they were able to do so on a much cheaper basis because they weren't doing a dry well. And these updates are looking to help improve the ability for projects like this to do those lower cost solutions and have more flexibility to do those things and not just default to a dry well, which is significantly more expensive.
Thank you. Christine?
I see how it's easy to kind of lump this project in with high valuation projects because it seems like they're already spending a lot. And so what's another $50,000 or $150,000? I think, Bill, I hear what you're saying, and what I think we might need is more information on how this is affecting specifically lower valuation projects and affordable housing projects, because I certainly wouldn't want someone to not upgrade their housing unit because
You'll trigger something else.
It's 30% of their valuation of what they're doing, or if they're doing a $50,000 remodel and all of a sudden they need to do $75,000 of exterior work. So for me, I think I need more information to kind of understand the bigger picture of what's the impacts of this are.
I just want to say for the record, that was the point I was getting at, was just trying to, we don't talk about this very often. I think you make great points, but like to get into any sort of policy change, especially since this is the status quo, I would want more information on how nuanced this policy is to potentially avoid the bad, keep the good, and keep our streams clean. That's the point.
That sounds like a good compromise. And, I do think that the goal, keeping the goal in mind is the number one thing, and keeping measures and ability that doesn't negatively impact our community beyond their means. Real quick, though, I do think we can have a follow-up work session to this with more examples and more specific information. But what I'm gathering is that we don't want to hold back from moving forward to more innovative, impervious solutions that, other than a dry well, being included in this manual. So I don't want to put that on hold for too long if people are
That's my
moving into the
perspective.
construction.
My only issue is this interior remodel threshold stuff.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is really important that we stay on top of this with climate changing the way rainfall comes down in increased amounts. And I think the environment's why we live here and why tourists visit, and we should be doing the right thing for the environment and for ourselves. And my main impression is, you know, when it's a major level project and people are ripping out walls and ripping out plumbing, they can afford this little extra, okay, not little, they can afford the extra expense to take care of the environment if their impacts are that large. I'd also like to remind everybody that we have downstream users too, Basalt, Carbondale, Glenwood, et cetera. This also affects them. I do agree with Bill and Christine, we should have a little more information about the lower income people.
Yeah, no, I think that that's reasonable, and if we could kind of boot this to a meeting we'll have in January, we'll set up a new schedule and really try to focus on this idea more of, let me put it this way, implementation. You know, because it's hard for me to visualize this, but it's like, are there some places you really could just walk to and say, well, if you put in a paver sidewalk with this stuff, that'll be all you need to do, or if you do the drains. So let's try to, you know, not have us just imagine our worst case scenario where the 80-year-old widow wants to remodel her kitchen and now has a $115,000 bill. It's got to be, you know, what are the real world consequences and what are the impacts? And some of those are costs that people will just simply need to bear, and others are things that can we find a less costly way to achieve the goals for some people.
In order for us to do this kind of analysis, we're going to need more time than January.
Sure.
And it also allows us to proceed, like you've mentioned, on the other updates, and then we can come back with, you know, what we found and what those, you know, with the direction with the other updates too. So it can be an all-encompassing work session.
Does that sound okay with everyone?
Yeah, that sounds good, but I did want to respond to something John said, and Rachel, about sort of, if you're spending X amount of dollars, you can afford to do this type of thing. You know, someone may have purchased a house for a modest sum in the 80s or 90s, and their living situation, their physical health might have necessitated the need for remodeling their house to accommodate their current needs in life. That does trigger these thresholds. Yeah. And they may not have the type of liquid assets that people who bought a house for $25 million might have. And all we are doing with these sort of continued rigorous, expensive regulations is just further driving up the cost of doing anything in this town, owning real estate, keeping our locals here. Not everybody can afford to own and remodel and maintain a $25 million house. So it's not just affordable housing and everybody who has unlimited amounts of money. You know, I'm one of those people. I don't live in affordable housing, but I don't have unlimited amounts of money, and these things do add up for me, and they do make a difference to me, and they do drive decisions for me, and I think they would for all of you too in a similar situation. So I think the goals are noble and the goals are important, and I agree with the goals, and in new development I'm fine with them, and I'm glad that we're making progress in modernizing things, but it is really critical to continue to make Aspen, or to keep Aspen and improve on Aspen's livability and affordability for everybody, not just people in affordable housing.
Well said.
Rachel?
Yeah.
Sorry. Point taken, Bill. I would also say that I'm in the same boat as you. I actually find myself owning some real estate in town, and I might be remodeling in the future. So this will affect me as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we'll come back and try to get this into some manageable categories of what the expense is. And, you know, I don't know if there is or should be any sort of hardship provision so that, you know, we could really work with people who may be just on that edge, you know. But very good comments.
Thanks.
Is there anything else you need from us today?
No.
And nothing else other than we'll see everyone at 5 o'clock, or did you have anything, Pete?
I just wanted to bring up that we had a number of informational memos to the council. I didn't know if there was any feedback from anything there.
I did have one. Thank you for the trigger. I think this business toolkit is good. I think it brings to light how many impediments and challenges there are to opening a new small business in this town. I think that this guide helps people to navigate those, but I think it's worthwhile for everyone to take a step back and look at, oh my gosh, if I'm trying to open a small mom and pop boutique or something like that, or food service establishment, there's a heck of a lot I gotta do to do business in this town. And that adds to the cost of everything that person can sell or offer, and it adds to what we have to pay for those things. So further to my earlier point about the interior thresholds, we impose a lot of the cost of living on Aspen on ourselves in a major way, and I think we should all remember that.
Thank you.
I guess I'll speak to the other ones that we spoke about earlier real quick. As far as the Burlingame Transit Service, I reached out to the gentleman who had asked me about this in the first place, and especially with the memo, asked him to pseudo-defend that pilot that we would potentially do next summer. And when he gives me that feedback, I'll report back to you all about that, because I am interested as far as if that will make a difference and be worth the expenditure. And then secondly, the West End congestion follow-up. I was talking to Rachel about this earlier, just how about I really want to be deliberate, understand where these 15 items are going, make sure they don't duplicate what we've done before, and make sure that we're not, that the things that we have done before, we're not just wasting previous studies, because we have spent so much money, if not on the same thing, a similar thing. And we need to start doing some of these things now based off these studies and not just keep doing more studies. It's a good way to keep things moving along. And then honestly, last one on the lumberyard priorities, I didn't mention this earlier, is just every time we have a work session, obviously it's a good reminder that these things end up being getting towards solidification, and understanding that, especially that employee program in like the 50 slots and all that sort of thing, still early stages. And I hope we really also take a deep dive into that when that comes back to us and there's actually concrete information on it.
Yeah, absolutely we will. I think it was explained a couple times that if we don't have anything about it in January, we'll never have it. And it's a program we can choose never to use, or future councils choose never to use. But it relates back to that Burlingame bus in the sense of the expensive transit services that will be needed to be provided for both. So, any else for anything? Okay, well, we'll meet again tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And if you have any questions that you, from your reading, you want to forward on to Pete so staff's prepared to answer, that always keeps things moving.